I don't think anybody would deny that Howard gives epic interviews, right? You can love or hate Howard Stern, but there's no way you can not be compelled by the way he interviews. And it's gotten a lot more interesting over the last few years because, as you know, if you follow Howard at all, he's done a lot of work on himself. He knows that he's sort of embarrassed about his middle phase of life, right? Where he was scared and jealous and very ego driven and was out to destroy, very sort of insecure in his career, and talks about why. So anyway, this book, Howard Stern Comes Again, is a book of his best interviews, and he talks about what he was thinking when the interview happened, what he likes about it, why he thinks it's significant, and it's really good because I love great interviews. But a couple interesting things I learned about this book from Stern. That I wrote an email about it that'll go out next week about this whole idea of keeping attention. This is something obviously we need to be super focused on. In this day and age, a big part of our job as copywriters is, winning and keeping attention, right? The headline's got to be more bold and spot on than ever. All the things we focus on as copywriters. Getting, one thing that has not changed about our jobs as copywriters is, right, our job is what? Every line of copy has one specific job. Who wants to say what it is? What's the one main job of every line of copy? Anybody want to say it? That's right, Joshua Lee Henry. No, to get the next line read, right? Exactly. And that's the same with a headline. A headline's job is to get you reading the subheads and then the body. And then, if you think about that, it's easy to lose that these days because we have so much space. We're not limited by space anymore, right? If you're in print, you're very limited by space. You have to make some hard choices. We got pixels, man. They're sort of like, they're very inexpensive. You can have pages and pages and pages of copy, but does that mean you should? Probably not. So Howard was talking about not making excuses for himself, but he said part of the motivation for the way he used to do those very raunchy interviews in his style back in the day when he was on terrestrial radio, which is before satellite, right? The method of, just like commercial television. Hey, the radio is free for you, but it's all about selling the ads. We got to please the advertisers. And he was talking about, they measure in 15-minute increments, okay? And so really what they're judging you as not only the size of your audience, but how long that audience, that listener stays with you every 15 minute. Can you get them from block to block, or are they clicking around? Are they changing the channel? Are they, so they measure all that. And so Howard became obsessed with that idea of keeping somebody past the break, and would look at the clock and see that 15 minutes come up, and there's no way even if he had an interesting question, a follow-up question for a guest, he wouldn't take the risk of them starting into a long story or taking too long to get to the point. He saw that, 15 minutes coming up, and he would just say the most outrageous thing he could, because he knew that's what would get his listener to stay tuned, keep him glued to the radio. And so he developed this instinct to do that. And it wasn't until he went to satellite radio that the shackles were sort of off. He didn't have to think about everything in 15-minute increments. All he had to think about was putting on the best show he could to get people to subscribe to Sirius. That was his new job, right? So he went from a traditional model to a subscription model, which is an interesting, parallel to what we do a lot here in direct response. And so finally he was able to do more interesting interviews, longer form interviews, ask more interesting questions, and get at much deeper stuff. And brought himself into it more, talked more about his work in therapy, his quirks and all that. So something to think about, like to me, the obvious equation here is what ad are you writing? How is the audience going to engage with it? What action do we need them to take? And how should you write it to keep attention, and win the action based on that, right? So, if the way I would speak to you once you become a member of Copy Chief is completely different than if I was trying to compel you to join Copy Chief. I would need to, it's just a different conversation as far as the way it's laid out. I know that you have no loyalty to the conversation beyond hopefully me delivering something value to you. But, I have to get to it very quickly in an ad, as opposed to right now where we get to have a more, a conversational conversation and share our ideas, because you're in the club now. We're here, we're friends, we're partners. You've committed to be a part of this, right? So something to think about, man. As a copywriter, again, a choice you have is you can specialize in, creating copy that gets the sale. Obviously, that's always our job. But you could also focus on content-based copy that is super effective after the sale, because it's a different conversation. Recognizing the things that make those conversations so different, how people will engage with us once they've become a customer as opposed to before they become a customer. Super useful. The other cool thing about this book that I thought was worth sharing was how it became a book. Stern hated writing his other two books, swore he'd never do it again because he has OCDs and he's a perfectionist and it's just hell. And the way the guy from Simon & Schuster sort of tricked him into writing this book was he took a meeting with him about it. And he showed up with a finished version of the book. He said, all we want, Howard, is a book of your best interviews. And so all you'd have to do is write an introduction to the book. Look, it's here, it's already done. And maybe a couple of notes about what you liked about those interviews. And suddenly it changed the whole proposition for him, right? It was like he could see it, and then he got enthralled with the idea. And of course, he spent another 2 years being a perfectionist, and he changed every interview. It became a new project. But it was interesting that dude handed him could back up. I'll make this, basically results in advance. How about if you had to do no work, Howard, to have your next book? And it worked. So I think that's something interesting we could think about too when we're trying to land clients. What could we show them in advance that's going to make them go, oh my God, you mean I get to actually have this now and I only have to do this or that? Pretty cool. Results in advance marketing at its finest.